What's up?
What's up, Pablo?
How are you guys? This is being recorded? Is this like a real thing? Is this like a stream?
Yep, James is recording it so that way we could have old subs, be able to reference it, refer to it, and we're gonna
Wow.
drop some nuggets.
I'm very
Yeah,
excited for both the credit and the blame.
yeah, aka don't suck. If you suck, it's on record. So just to be said.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
okay.
We'll see how it
But
goes. See how it goes.
Pablo, just so you know, the only thing that I really brought up so far is Matthew Stafford stats is a pretty easier way to leverage this slate. Like all of his options are going to be highly owned, and he's not. So that's pretty interesting. Talked about like
Yeah.
not really fading Jordan Mason. If you wanted to fade him for Dobbs, you could, but so they're running back from the Chargers. Did I get his name wrong? Dobbins. Sorry, I'm thinking of fucking Josh Dobbs. Dobbins. But honestly, I like the idea of playing them together or playing another cheap back with them. And I said Tampa Bay, Detroit. I want to overstack that game. If I'm taking a quarterback from that game, I probably want four pieces other in the game. Two receiving options, then two from the other side.
Yep. I don't disagree with any of that. Um, I think this is a really fun slate because there's so many different ways to build. You can pick game environments. People aren't going to stack as much. You can fade some of the chalk and play like really obvious direct leverage uh, by fading that chalk. Meaning, one of the things I've been trying to ask myself when I'm building is, what am I saying by what I'm not playing? Right? Like, so if I'm not playing um, Kyron Williams, what am I saying? And it means that Cup and maybe these receivers, you know, vultured him and he didn't have the game. Um, and so I think I just think there's like a number of ways to build on this slate, and I also think it's weird. It's like a little bit weird to me, at least on DraftKings, the way, and I think what's driving this is just like opto building chalk. It's like some of the chalk I find surprising. Like like I am I find it surprising that Jaden Daniels is chalk. Like I find it a little surprising Mahomes is chalk just because I totally get people saying if Kansas City scores 30, it probably means he did good, but that hasn't always been true for Mahomes, especially early in the year. Like they do occasionally like just boat race teams, and Mahomes has like a good but not like a crazy ceiling game. And so it's weird to me that Mahomes and Daniels are the chalk, and it makes me feel like just by not playing them and stacking with the quarterbacks I like, which are all cheaper and have pairing receiving options, whether it's Goff or Mayfield in that game, whether it's Stafford unowned because he's just kind of like off the radar for people, or whether it's Dak who like nobody's gonna
I'll
play,
go turn the
Kyler
electricity on.
or Jason. I think you're we can hear you talking to your wife, I believe. Um, anyway,
Oops, my bad.
I just think no, it's all good. I just think that not to be overly long-winded about this, I just think there's like really good ways to build leverage in GPPs, and and there's like really good pivots and direct leverage on some of the other plays. I know those are like very macro thoughts, but I think it's important in a slate when there's going to be so much concentrated chalk, like to understand what the general build structure will be, and then what is your lineup saying already, and then appropriately levering it for the field size that you're playing. Now, James, do you think those are reasonable thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not quite done with my thoughts and notes article, but I'm enough through it to have gotten a pretty good understanding of the slate in general. I think my main consensus here is that I think that the chalk is really good in terms of the main established opportunities that we have. You know, like Kansas City is chalk, they're good chalk. Detroit is chalk, they're good chalk. San Francisco has a lot of chalk, they're probably fine, right? Like, the Rams have a lot of chalk that, like, in a vacuum makes a lot of sense. Jason already mentioned that Matthew Stafford at like 5% owned. I've kind of been beating that drum, and I mentioned in the article as well. But that is a situation where we can just kind of leverage that people are wanting to eat a lot of one-offs, but not willing to actually stack with Matthew Stafford. Yep. So I think that a lot of the chalk, while it makes sense, there are, like you said, there's some weird pieces of chalk. Like, when I go over to the range of outcomes and I sort by ownership, it's like, why is Jade Daniels 12% owned? It doesn't make any sense.
Right? It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense. And especially, like, people just keep saying, like, oh, well, you just got to play him naked. It's like, okay, well, if you're going to play a 12% owned quarterback without any correlation, like, you're paying rake.
And also, but there's also great direct pivots in Mayfield, right. Goff, Stafford, and even Dak. I mean, what are we doing here?
Well, and Purdy. Like, you can go Purdy as well. Like, people are going to play Deebo Samuel, and if you want to go with, like, you want to talk about gaining relative value and leverage on a slate, stack San Francisco instead of using Jordan Mason. There's your large field stack. Like, large field, Jordan Mason's going to be 40-something% owned. If you stack San Francisco with Purdy, Kittle, and Deebo rushes in for 2 touchdowns, and Purdy throws for 1 to Kittle and 1 to Ayuk and 1 to Deebo, and Jordan Mason finishes with like 13 fantasy points on 17 carries.
Yep.
Like, you just win the entire slate just from that, right? So I think that while there is a lot of chalk that makes sense, there are some weird pieces that people are just kind of not paying enough attention to the way that things are working.
The one, James, the one I want your opinion on, because admittedly, I just listened to ETM, Established a Million, with Dink and Mike Leone, and they brought this up, which was like, it's like the one piece of chalk that seems really safe, but at his price, like, are we not questioning the matchup enough? And I just want your take on it, which is Breece Hall. Like this morning and last night when I was working on my lineups, I'm like, oh, Breece Hall. Like, Breece Hall is going to be like Wayne or Kyron Williams. Like, you know, but like Breece looks like mega chalk now alongside Mason. And I totally get Breece Hall's role. And I'm not like a huge ball watcher. I'm like really not at all. I mostly just trust people who do watch ball when it comes to like opinions that matter about actual scheme and stuff. But it's like, I don't, and I know Vrabel's gone and blah, 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 but like, I don't know that, like, if I'm just thinking from a pure opportunity cost standpoint, like obviously Breece Hall could go off, but as like heavy chalk, like in small field, I think Breece Hall is going to be 60%. Like 60%, 7,400 with guys around him at that price. If you play 2 other running backs that have like huge ceiling, right? I'm just asking myself, I'm sort of torn on it. Like I think he's pretty good chalk, but I do wonder if it's like a little shakier at heavy ownership than people would think otherwise.
I think he's good chalk. He's good chalk. His usage was incredible. 84% of the rushing attempts, 71% route participation, 21% of the targets. Targets per route is 27%. Like, his PPR points was 20.3. His, let's see, I think it's this.
So his usage was super good. Like, my issue isn't with his usage or his role. It's about his price and his ownership.
Well, his expected fantasy points was 18.29. All right. And so when it comes down to his ownership and his role, like, his role is terrific. His ownership is going to be high, but it's pretty justified at his expected fantasy points, his actual fantasy points, like his usage, his median, all this stuff just points to him being the pay up at running back. I don't really have any reason to say otherwise, right? Like even here at Pater, I don't know what he's projected at ETR,
Yeah,
but
I'm
here at
looking.
Pater,
He's 21.
yeah, he's
Ceiling
projected
42.
He's projected for 21 as a fantasy points as a median. The next highest running back is 17. Like
Yeah,
it's
that's fair.
like not
That's
even
fair.
close.
That's fair. That's fair. That's fair.
And I'm not somebody who's just going to point to be like, oh well, look at the projections. Like,
But
when you have
relative to the other options at his price. Hey, you know something by the way that would be helpful in range of outcomes? Adding a flex button so we can compare RB WRTE in the same tab. That way we can compare pivots for the flex position.
You can do that if you go to overall range of outcomes and you select specific positions and you just remove.
Okay. Yeah, but you may want to make it one of the default toggles at the top.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway.
People do question that. Going back to Breece Hall, like his top finish rate among running backs is 25%. The next highest is 9% for Alvin Kamara. It's not even. If you're paying up, you're probably just playing Breece Hall, and I'm fine with that. I don't think that it's a question of does he deserve the ownership. He definitely deserves the ownership. I think that it's a question of does he deserve the ownership versus pivots at the same price point in other positions. Like, would you play Breece Hall over Cooper Kupp? I think is a better question. Those guys both project 21 fantasy points. Would you play him over, Deebo Samuel? Deebo Samuel at 6,800 projects for 19.6, which is really close to that 21 points, and you get a little bit of a discount. So I think that. Hey,
speaking of Deebo, does it bother you in smaller field? And I feel like this is a field size question. Does it bother you to play him alongside Mason? Because in small field, I almost feel like you just say, I'm locking Mason, and I don't care. Like he's like, if he does fine, I'm willing to ride with the field. But there is to me, there is some negative inverse correlation between Deebo and Mason. I mean, they do both. They do steal rushing touchdowns from each other.
Yeah. Jason, why don't you answer that one? Because I think that we all agree on it, but I want to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah. So, you know what? When we talked about this on the bakery, I think that similar to the Rams, where people are going to be jamming in Kyron and Kupp together, I think if you think this game goes a certain way, you can capture all the upside of that game just by playing those two together. I don't really have a problem with it. The only thing that I will say is that, the fact that Deebo is, also gets some rushes too, I kind of feel like they can eat into each other's ceiling that way. But also, I think you're looking at a combined possible, 35, 40, sometimes even a little bit more than that touches between them. Deebo's probably going to be at 15 touches minimum between his targets and rushes. And Jordan Mason, if this game goes the way we think it is, they could just pound the rock again, right? So I don't have a problem with it, but I don't think it's going to be my first initial. Like I'm only going to put Deebo in if he fits with him. I'm not going to start with both of them together.
Yeah, I mostly would not play them in the same lineup. Only because if you think about someone from a median standpoint, I agree with you that there's a certain amount of value that you're getting from playing them together. I mean, them together is what, 12,000 or something. There's a pretty reasonable expectation that both of them can score 15 to 20 fantasy points, give you 40 fantasy points for 12K. That's pretty good. But when you start talking about the tail end of their outcomes, when you talk about the realistic ceiling for them, they absolutely eat into each other's ceilings. Yeah. And then it gets back into that conversation of would you rather play X or Y? Like for 6,800, would you rather play Deebo Samuel or would you rather play Rashee Rice at 6,700? I think that's a very reasonable 1v1 that you can make if you're looking. You already have Jordan Mason locked in, and you're saying, well, I have $6,800. If you have that 2v2 between him and Rashee Rice, you should probably just play Rashee Rice because Rashee Rice is not going to eat into the ceiling at all of Jordan Mason. But from a median expectation standpoint, like if we're talking cash, if we're talking single entry, if we're talking like small fields, I don't have a problem with it because the median is probably fine. But once you start getting into those contests or like 1,500, 2,000 people or whatever, you got to start worrying about
ceiling.
the tail ends.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you both about Kansas City. My inclination, because at his price, again, I would rather just down to the cheaper options than play Mahomes. Like some of that is being informed, or some of that is rather informing my desire or my decision to feel like I have to play some Pacheco, because it's like I really don't see how Kansas City doesn't, like, how they don't get there. I mean, it's possible, but I think Cincinnati's defense is bad. I think Kansas City's really, really good. I mean, it's kind of that simple to me. So I'm just wondering, I mean, are you guys okay eating Rice one-offs to capture some Kansas City, Pacheco, and maybe even pair them with the D if you want? Um, Kels one-offs. I mean, I sort of like if Kels is chalky. He's looking like the chalkiest running back, tight end, because there's straight line pivots to Laporta and McBride. Um, and it kind of makes me happy because I feel like both of those guys are in really great spots in terms of game environment. Um, it's a very long-winded way of asking you, like, how, like, I mostly don't think I'm building Mahomes teams. And so as a result of that, I feel like I either have to capture some of that game in the form of Rice as a one-off or Pacheco. I guess that's what I'm saying. Kels, I could make the same argument for, although I like the pivots at his price enough that I think I'm more interested in Rice and Pacheco. How do you guys feel about Kansas City and my take on that game?
Yeah, I think I would mostly agree. As James said, I think Kansas City's, okay chalk, right? Like if people want to go there. There's something that you said on the bakery, and it's been sticking with me too, is, you have to figure out what you're and understand like what you're not playing when you decide not to play somebody, right? Like Kansas City still has a sick team total. I
Oh, I lost Jason. I don't know if you guys did too.
Poor guy's been having mic issues.
Okay.
I will pick up.
Yeah.
Kansas City is like they're fine. I do have interest in them. It's not so much that I think that they won't. Say that again.
Jason, you just cut back in, but we can't really hear you, buddy.
Oh no, Jason's dead. Dead. I think Kansas City's fine. It's not that I don't think they won't get there. They have a good team total. I like Rashee Rice probably more as a one-off. With you, I think. I agree with that. At the same time, it all just kind of comes down to how I want to put things together. My concern is that it's probably really easy to go something like Mahomes, Rice, Kelsey with Jordan Mason and Zach Charbonnet, and then using the rest of the value that we have to make the same lineup that other people have in small field. Like it feels like a very plug and play way to go. And Patrick Mahomes projects as the highest owned quarterback on the slate right now at like 16% or something. I'm not really stoked on playing Patrick Mahomes as like the Giga Chalk. I'd rather play, Lamar Jackson, or I'd rather play Matthew Stafford or something like that. I mean, that there's kind of more value to me in playing Matthew Stafford and a Ram stack and using Rashee Rice as a one-off than there is in using Patrick Mahomes and a Kansas City stack and using Cooper Kupp as a one-off. It just makes more sense to go on the other direction for that.
Yeah. I feel the same.
totally agree with that. Totally agree.
Yeah. Anyway, Jason, now that you're back from the dead, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. My Wi-Fi's fucking around, so I'm sorry about that. So no, I was just gonna say I like Pacheco as getting a piece to that game. We haven't projected as the second highest, scoring running back on the slate. He's probably a guy I'm gonna use in a lot of my builds, like if I'm going Tampa Bay, Detroit, if I'm going Rams, if I find myself on some other stacks, I'm going to use him as a piece to get to that game. But I do agree. I think Rashid Rice is just a little bit more of a high upside one off. I think, the top end of his range gives you the direct leverage over a guy like Debo, too, in the similar price range. I'm going to mix them both in personally. I like them both. I probably won't be stacking Kansas City. I'm with you, James. I'm not as excited about it. I'll get a taste at MME, but I I just don't think I want to pay this entire stack.
Yeah, yeah. I think we all feel similarly then. The one of the things macro build wise, I'm asking myself is kind of at running back. I think probably the chalk pairing looks like it's going to be at minimum Mason Hall, and then it'll be fairly common to use Kyron in the flex. So if you think about that, that's 74 and 52 for Hall Mason. That's 12-6, right? And so, if you sort, I have the range of outcomes open, and if I'm looking at the running backs and I sort them by 2x, um, Hall and Dobbins and Ford basically have like very similar 2, 3, and 4x's. So if you pivot from Hall to Dobbins or Ford, essentially what you're doing there is you're saving yourself 2,000 to spend at your wide receiver or your tight end, right? So I'm just asking myself, like, is a pivot from Hall to Dobbins, Ford, or Charbonnet to sort of change the Mason Hall pairing, what it affords you in that price savings for your flex, which by definition, or rather not your flex, for WRTE position. I guess flex if you only play like Mason and Dobbins or Mason and Ford or Mason and Charbonnet, you don't have to play three of those guys instead of Mason Hall. But I'm just wondering like what that 2,000 or so affords you, if it's worth it, right? Because it is going to be a different build to go double cheap running back. I guess that's my point.
Interesting question. The one thing,
I don't know.
yeah, it's the one thing I'll say, man, that I've been finding myself finding myself at a lot of this week when I mess around with those two cheap running back builds. I actually like find myself back on Brees Hall as like in a 3 running back build. That's one thing that I'm finding myself a lot on. I think
the reason, because Jason, I think the reason why is because of what we were saying before. Like the guys at Hall's price range, it's hard. Like it's what James was saying a little bit ago. Like because you're debating for your third spot. If you try to go double running back instead of Hall, like, are you going Debo? Can you get up to Cup, Wilson, Rashee Rice? Right? I mean, those are kind of like your pivots at his price range that you'd be considering. And like none of those feel that great,
Yeah,
right? Compared to Hall.
they definitely
Like
don't.
you're not like, oh, you're not, right? You're not, I mean, so that's why I think it's a hard decision. Like ultimately you end up mostly just saying, fuck it. Like I'd rather just play Hall and I'm already getting weird with my stack. So why am I even worried about it?
Yeah, the only one that I'm sorry, go ahead, James, you got it. I'm sorry, I don't know. I thought you were James for a second. Sorry.
I did too. Actually. But no, what do you mean? What do you mean with Hall and Henry? That means you're only using one cheap running back, right? Oh, Hall or Henry. I got you. Yeah, I think that might be a pretty popular approach. I mean, you can see why because I just think that the pivots off of Hall don't feel that great. I mean, at his price range, you're not like that happy to play Rashee Rice over Hall for a little cheaper. And it's not that easy to get up to Cup from Hall. It's 500 more you need. So I think that's why. I think it just feels a lot more comfortable to play Hall with the two cheap running backs, or just play Mason and him, right? I mean, like and just call it a day. Um, I just do wonder, like, if knowing that we should consciously be forcing ourselves to pivot off of him a little bit, right? That's I guess what I'm asking.
Yeah, it's I mean I think you could do some really cool things with that, but none of those options really make you feel great as you mentioned. And also too, just because you get off of him, it doesn't mean you're gonna be able to get up to the CD Lambs of the world. And honestly, based upon, our sheets, you probably shouldn't need to unless you're stacking that game. There is one play I think you can get to. I want to call it thin because even though they're around a similar price range and this guy does project well, he is just a lower owned option on the same team. You could pivot to Garrett Wilson. Our sheets very much prefer that we stick with Brees Hall, but you are going to be paying a lot less of a premium, $300 less, and wide receivers typically just have a little bit more. They don't need as much to get there. You can have a few big plays and get there. So that's maybe a route. But honestly, man, now that we're talking it through, outside of going 3 running back, with 2 cheap running backs, I don't know if it's worth really pivoting off of him. In smaller fields, I should say. Large fields, anything's really a discussion. But small field,
Yeah, I think
I
it's
don't think it's
more.
worth it.
I think I no no. I think it's small field. It's more. It's more. Who are you using in the flex spot instead of 2 cheap running backs? So using Hall and Mason. In small field, I think it's just Hall and Mason, and then you're asking yourself at the third spot, who am I using instead of Dobbins or Charbonnet? That's kind of the question you're asking yourself. That makes sense? Yeah. It's I think for NFL for me, like a lot of the time it I think you end up doing a lot of chalk analysis, and which is it makes sense because you're kind of like asking yourself from a build standpoint or from a willingness to fade a chalky piece, like where are you making your stance? Um, and what makes me feel better about liking some of the chalk in the flex positions is that I feel confident that playing Stafford as a double or Dak as a double is already weird enough, especially for smaller field, that you still have a ton of leverage because like you're not playing Jaden Daniels, you're not playing Mahomes, and I just I do wonder if Baker might get steamed a little bit for the record. Like I think that a lot of people are having the same thought. Hey, I want a lot of pieces from that Detroit Tampa Bay 51.5 total dome game. And so in GPPs, I think sharp players are all saying to themselves, well, why don't I play, Mayfield? He's 5,900. You can play with Evans, Godwin, or the cheap guy, McMillan. If you want to get weird, you can even play Rashad White. Opposite, you've got like a million options. I do wonder if it's like such an obvious tournament play if Baker comes in closer to like 15% in small field, maybe 10%, maybe 15 is a little high, but um, I guess I'm saying that I still like it and I still think it's low enough owned that I'm very excited to do it and I will do it in at least a couple of my lineups. But I do think it's worth asking yourself if it's obvious enough that for larger field, I don't know that it makes as much sense. Mayfield stacks.
A couple things. I don't. There's no way that Baker Mayfield's going to be 15% owned. People just don't like playing him, and he doesn't have rushing upside. I think that people will be much more inclined to play like Patrick Mahomes going to be 15%. Lamar Jackson will probably end up being 10%. Jaden Daniels is going to be like 12 to 15%. Then you got a whole bunch of guys that are just going to get some ownership. Baker Mayfield might get 10%, but I don't think he's going to get much more than that. Regarding the Brees Hall, if you should just pay down, I think it's entirely viable to pay double down at running back. I don't see a reason to pay way up at Brees Hall when I know that I can get Cooper Kupp, I know that I can get Deebo Samuel, I know that I can get Rashee Rice, I know that I can get, especially
This is why you're the game theory goat, dude, because you are like you're unemotional about it. You're just like, you know what? It's like a math question, like we don't need to be scared to do it, right?
No,
And
we don't.
that's the way you have to think so that you don't just do what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, it's an easy question to me. I mean, especially like say that you wanted to go because we have a lot of cheap running backs, right? We have Jerome Ford. I'm just going to list off guys under 6K that are like I think valuable. Jerome Ford, J.K. Dobbins, Jordan Mason, Zach Charbonnet, Zach Moss even had a good role in week 1. Ramondre Stevenson is 6,200 and looked terrific. Like you have all of these guys. Why would we feel ultra inclined to pay up at Brees Hall when we could pay, especially if you wanted to go J.K. Dobbins and Jordan Mason? I mean, J.K. Dobbins faces frickin' Carolina. He's 5,400. Yeah. He had like 30 fantasy points last week, and he's projected at 8% owned. If you wanted to play Jordan Mason and J.K. Dobbins, that costs you 10.6K. You're very likely getting 40 to 45 opportunities in good matchups. And you're fading a lot of ownership in doing it. And then that gives you the money to be able to not only have Cooper Kupp, but also pair him with one of Amon-Ra St. Brown or CeeDee Lamb. Or you can do a bring back, right? Where since you're using Jordan Mason, you can bring back against him Justin Jefferson. Yeah. Who's 8,300, and you have a game stack.
Yeah. Yep.
So I just don't see the need to go with Brees Hall. Is Brees Hall a good play? Yeah, for sure. He's a great play.
Yeah.
But we in DFS have been for the last 5 years looking to pay as little as possible at running back for the most opportunities possible. And I don't see why we break that mold to play Brees Hall in this spot.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And also, too, the crazy thing is with this week is that you could play Brees Hall and still go get those guys if you really want to. Like, it's some of the builds I've been toying around with, like Stafford doubles and, a guy like Shaheed makes it all work. Like, you could still do that. But, yeah, I'm with you, James. It's just I just put a build together now with like a Stafford double, and I left Mason Dobbins, and I was able to get Rashee Rice, Amon-Ra St. Brown, get a really good Rams double I like, and I'm not totally punting a position,
Yep. Let me ask you about the Rams, because it's a good segue, and it's something I've been asking myself as I've been building. How are you guys sifting through who you're pairing Kupp and Stafford with? Because you're playing Kupp if you're playing Stafford, and really the question just becomes Demarcus Robinson, Tyler Johnson, or Colby Parkinson, or if you want to be contrarian and play tribe double running back QB, you can go Kyron with him. Obviously playing Kupp. I don't like playing Kupp and Kyron, to be clear. To me, there's just too much inverse touchdown correlation there. But I don't have a great way to decide between Demarcus Robinson, Tyler Johnson, and Colby Parkinson aside from price. I mean, I'm looking at their point per dollar projection, and they're basically all the same. So it's kind of just like, what does the price difference between Demarcus Robinson at 4K or Tyler Johnson or Colby Parkinson at 3.1 and 3.3K? What does that afford you in terms of the rest of what you're building around the stack? But maybe you guys disagree and you think those plays are all very different than each other. How are you deciding who you're pairing Kupp and Stafford with if you're going to stack Stafford?
I mean,
Jason?
Yeah, so I kind of think with this game specifically, I have a pretty good read on who I think is going to benefit from McCool being out. And I kind of hate that he's getting ownership right now, But Tyler Johnson is going to fill that role. All preseason, he's been really filling that role too, playing behind Nakua. If I'm going to stack this game and double it up, I probably will get some Parkinson, Cody Parkinson too. But I really like the Tyler Johnson pairing for 3,300. I think he's going to get some pretty valuable targets. Do I think he's going to convert them? That's a whole other ball game. I don't like how owned he is, but if I am going to probably stack, it's probably Cup and him, and then I'd probably rank them like that. Then Cup Parkinson, and then Cup Robinson. I probably would rank it that 1 through 3. I'm splitting hairs too by like who I'm picking in that, but that's probably where I lean just based upon the knowing ball scheme and like what they're going to do. The Cardinals play a lot of cover 4. They give up the whole entire middle of the field. So those middle routes that Nakua really runs a lot, that's what Johnson's going to run. So that's kind of why I'm saying that. I hate that he's 12% owned though. That makes me want to puke.
Yeah, but I have 2 thoughts to add about what's nice about Johnson. In a world where everyone's always looking for the 3 to mid 5K punt receiver, it's always really nice to find that guy as part of your staff pairing. It feels a lot less fragile because you're sort of saying like, if this quarterback gets there, there's a better chance this cheap punt wide receiver gets there too. You're not. There's a little bit of safety in doing that, and I love doing that. So it's one of the benefits of using Tyler Johnson. Now, admittedly, Parkinson's very cheap too at 3,100. But what's really also nice about playing a Stafford double is that you have a very nice Trey McBride bring back, and so you're sort of you've got a lot of your lineup decided if you play a staff double because you're playing Staff, Cup, probably Johnson or Demarcus Robinson, or theoretically you're playing Parkinson. But one of the things I don't like about playing Parkinson and Stafford doubles is then you've eliminated your most obvious stream back in Trey McBride, unless you go double tight end build, which sort of meh to me on that. I would rather go Johnson for 200 more than Parkinson for the ceiling. So it's just a really nice stack to build around because it decides a lot for you, and then it's really just like some 2v2s and 3v3s on like your one-offs or your minis.
I was just reminded of my take from earlier in the week. Brian Robinson plus Washington defense. Don't let me galaxy brain off of that, please.
I may be going the other way with some Giants D, honestly.
I like the Giants.
No, I mean that's another cheap running back. Makes a lot of sense. I mean, none of us think that the Giants are gonna put up a bunch of points, right? Like none of us here think that that's gonna happen because they're not. Daniel Jones is about as
nobody here thinks that. Nobody here thinks that, and if you do, I ask you not to, kindly.
I mean, they just fucking suck, dude. They are so tragically bad. The offense is anemic. They have like one decent star player. They have no offensive line upgrades. They have a quarterback that can't see his dick from his elbow. Like that, it is a really bad team. Washington has a defensive head coach with Dan Quinn. Now, Dan Quinn is not a good offensive coach by any means, but he has shown to be a pretty decent defensive coach when given the opportunity. And I think that Washington and Brian Robinson, this is only large field stuff, right? Like I'm not doing this in 150.
Yeah, I got you.
But like that is a really interesting correlative combination that I think you could do way worse on. And you could do like Brian Robinson, Washington defense, and Malik Neighbors on the other side and get like plenty of the upside from that game.
Yeah, you know what's crazy about that too with Daniel Jones? Did you know that he had some of the most time to throw last week, James? Like his offensive line like actually did well, and he still just like couldn't deliver the ball to where he needs it to.
Bro,
it's bad.
As much as I talk shit about Bryce Young, who is like a backup level quarterback, Daniel Jones is not even backup level. He legitimately should not be in the league anymore. His contract is going to get paid out. He's going to get demoted. He's going to get released. I don't even think he'll get picked up as a backup QB in the league. He might make a practice squad somewhere, but he's legitimately not a QB that should be in the league.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. The only thing I will say, if there's ever a week in large field that you want to roll the dice on this guy, it really is this week. I'm gonna have some shares in my MME run, not a ton. He's probably gonna make like 5% of what I have, if that. But it's just a cheap game stack, and you don't need to do much to get the upside. And also, too, on the other side of that game, just more importantly, I know we're talking about how like Jaden Daniels is terrible chalk, and in a vacuum, I agree. But how often do you get a slate where a QB is terrible chalk, and the way to leverage him is to play a pass catcher with him? How often do you see that?
Yeah,
What,
I just
what do you
what
see?
fuck are we doing?
I don't know I don't get that point about stacking a pass catcher with him leverage, because I'm not sure I totally follow that. Tell me that part again.
This is just from strictly like if you're going to play him and he's really chalky, right? Like if you're playing a chalk quarterback, the fact I should say you balance your ownership better. That's a better phrasing for it. You pair him with McLaurin and bring back Neighbors as like a little mini correlation with Jaden Daniels.
Oh, you're saying I got you.
Yeah,
I got you.
yeah.
I got you.
Neighbors
is going to be chalky as fuck.
I don't.
Neighbors is going to be chalky as fuck.
I don't think he's going to be chalky as fuck.
I think he's going to be pretty chalky, dude. I think he's going to be. I mean, I don't know.
In large field, I think he's going to be sub 10%.
I think he's going to be 15 to 20.
Oh, no way. In large field? No fucking way. There's no way he's going to be like that in large field. There's no, I will lose my mind if he is sub 10%. Sorry, over 10% in large field. Small field, I think he could approach that. I think he can. Because a lot of the sharp players understand the value.
It is probably my small field take, because I think he's in cash consideration for, I think, smaller field, high dollar cash players, and I think that drives a lot of the builds for smaller fields.
Hold on, who are you talking about here? We're talking about Neighbors?
Yeah.
No, 10%, maybe. I don't see him being. I mean, I'm running cash optimals right now to finish out my article, and I can't see how people would end up with Malik Neighbors even in cash. Like I just don't see it happening.
I'm good with that. I mean, that honestly makes me happier.
Yeah, I have him for his cash game ownership. I have him at 6% owned. Small field's probably going to be something like 7. Like he's not going to be owned. Jason, to your point, I think that like if you were going to do it, you would end up going Daniel Jones, Malik Neighbors, and calling it good and not bringing anything back from Washington. Like if you think that the Giants are going to score points, but here's the thing. Here's the thing. I don't know if anybody remembers me talking about Wan'Dale Robinson last year, but like Wan'Dale Robinson was something like 3,700 maybe on a showdown slate, and he was projected to be like 45% owned or something. And I was having a conversation about it, and I was like, okay, look, Wan'Dale Robinson is 50% owned. If he has, based on Daniel Jones literally being unable to throw touchdowns, by the way, based on Daniel Jones and his track record, the best case scenario for Wan'Dale Robinson in that spot was like 6 catches for 48 yards and a single touchdown if he gets lucky. Very likely not scoring a touchdown. That's probably the ceiling for Malik Neighbors. It's like 6 catches for 62 yards and a touchdown. The absolute ceiling. The median outcome for a wide receiver on Washington, even a really good wide receiver, is going to be something like 4 to 5 catches for 50 yards and no touchdowns. You want to play that? That's what you want out of the median? That's not even the tail outcome for a wide receiver for the New York Giants in the best possible matchup is like 7 catches for like 86 yards and 2 touchdowns. Not even 100 yards. That's like the tail. That is the one good outcome you're going to get out of a New York Giants receiver the entire year. I can't
I
possibly
love it,
conceive
dude.
doing that.
I love how passionate you are about this. By the way, it screams Hard Knocks sort of. I did it. So if I don't know, this was like 10 years ago. I was fucking bored and miserable in my career training, and I needed to do something fun. So I started writing about I tried to learn X's and O's football, which I couldn't really do. And I remember asking myself at some point for no good reason, what is the history of teams that have been on Hard Knocks the year following they've been on the year before and after they've been on Hard Knocks? And it was like 95% the team was horrific the next year. It wasn't like 10%. The Giants in their off-season front office thing appeared to be so fucking inept. It just works so perfectly. I mean, it was such an obvious thing, painful to watch, to be honest. Um, anyway, I just think it's like perfect. Like you can go back and watch it and be like, okay, yeah, no shit, they fucking blow.
Yeah, you can't. These teams are on Hard Knocks because they suck and it's a train wreck, and America loves to watch a train wreck. The Giants are no different. I can't. I think that Malik Neighbors at 6% owned is probably fine to play in super large field stuff. Like, he might accidentally run into 2 touchdowns and have 85 yards. It might happen. Washington is bad. Jason, I pray for the portion of your portfolio that has exposure to Daniel Jones.
Oh shit, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. It would be unsurprising. Let me ask you guys about Detroit a little bit because I think it's an obvious game to game stack. It's an obvious game to target even if you're not game stacking it. What makes Goff a lot harder to play than Baker is that you're a little nervous about how much the Lions get there through the pass versus through the run, right? Whereas if Baker gets there, he's getting there. He's getting there with his receivers, and that's how he got there. If the Lions get there, did Goff get there? Um, did Amon Ra and Laporta get there, but Gibbs didn't? Did Gibbs get there, but then Laporta didn't get there? So it's a really, I think it's a tricky team to stack in that sense. There's just a lot of optionality. And I think it's somewhat dictated by what you want in the position you're not filling between those flex guys. Amon-Ra, Gibbs, Laporta, theoretically Montgomery, and JMO if he's healthy. Is JMO, I heard something about his ankle. Is this real? Is it a thing, or is it just rumor?
Probably just rumor.
Okay.
I wouldn't worry too much about it. But
okay,
to your point, I think that Detroit. I wrote it in the thoughts and notes, which will be out in 20 minutes or so. But they are projected for the most rushing touchdowns on the slate, not the most passing touchdowns, but they do have the highest team total. It's worth noting that Jahmyr Gibbs had a really good role last week. He had 11 carries and I think 6 targets. So, and Jameson Williams crushed it. I mean, he was really, really good last week, and I think that it's worth questioning if the 2 high safety stuff will have an effect on somebody like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who does so much work over the middle of the field. Whereas Jameson Williams can kind of spread on the boundaries. So I think that's an interesting thing to say. I did note also in the article that Jameson Williams, the contest sims basically think that he's like the best undervalued wide receiver on the slate. So yeah. I do like pieces of Detroit, but you're right, they have so many different ways to score that it's like do you really feel comfortable going with Goff? And to that point, you go back and you look at the game log for Goff last year, and he had, let's see, I'm going to go through each different week here. So he had 23 fantasy points in week 2, 27 and 22 and 5 and 6, 21 and 10, 22 and 12, and 31 and 15. And every other game was below 20 fantasy points.
Mm-hmm.
Like 14, 19,
and it just speaks to that, right? And they got there as a team plenty of times. I mean, they had like a lot of high scoring games. You would expect a lot more high scoring games from him, given the season they had last year.
Right. So, and even of those performances, right? Like the only game where he was like the top overall scoring quarterback was week 15. Outside of that, the week where he scored 22, he was the 8th best scorer. When he scored 21, he was the 9th. When he scored 22 and 27, he was the 4th. He was the 5th when he scored 23.9. So all of these instances, I just think that it makes so Goff, like, it's not that he can't get there. He can definitely get there. But I think that the lower ownership on him is justified because he gets there at a rate that is lower than a lot of these other guys, Patrick Mahomes can get there in a multitude of different ways. He can even run them in, right? Like he's still active running in the red zone. You have Lamar Jackson, you have Josh Allen, who's not on the slate, but you have Jaden Daniels, you have Baker Mayfield, who has probably the same ceiling as Jared Goff, and on the other side of that game, as you mentioned. So I think the ownership is justified. I don't think he's over or undervalued, but definitely think that at 5 to 10% owned, that's where you'd want to play him. You don't want to play him when he's 10 to 15, 15 to 20.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
You know who the sneakiest pay up on the whole slate is?
Lamar Jackson at 9% owned.
No, not quarterback, non-quarterback.
Oh, probably CeeDee Lamb at no ownership.
I don't know if he's going to be no. There's somebody who's I think going to be even less than him with arguably the same ceiling.
Lay it on me.
And he dropped the bar on Twitter today that you liked.
Oh, hell yeah, Justin Jefferson.
I mean, Justin Jefferson 8,300 is going to be not owned. He's not going to be owned. Like people are going to either get up to Lamb, they're going to play Amon-Ra, they're going to play Cup, they're going to play Breece Hall. They're not going to get up to Justin Jefferson.
Well,
it's like
I agree.
It is the sneakiest upside play in the whole slate.
By the way, before you
can do a great game stack with him and Jordan Mason.
Right.
By the way, going back to Detroit really quick, because I know we talked about like the too high safeties and whatnot. So this is per fantasypoints.com. If anybody really wants to go look at like how often teams are running certain schemes and whatnot, it's a great resource. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers last week, and kind of as expected, played the 5th highest 2-man look in the league, but they actually left the middle of the field open. So I actually think that a guy like Amon-Ra is probably going to bounce back in a big way. I know that that's not like really a secret, but just based upon the schemes too, like Jameson Williams last week, like the Rams played a bunch of man against them, right? And I think they could still man up, but they're showing like equal splits of like cover 2, cover 4, cover 3. I think if anything, they're going to let the middle of the field they're going to take those little 5 to 7 yard passes. That's just more of like a scheme note. I'm going to play a lot of Jameson Williams. I'm just saying I think it feels more like a script where Amon-Ra or Laporta like dominates that area in that space. That's just something that I picked up on after week 1.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I think there are you and there's a select number of people who people watch and know that. I mean, Silva made the same point, by the way, that Bucs defense is also decimated for whatever reason after one game. There's just a lot of reasons to like that game. I think it's interesting. I mean, there's just a lot of ways to play it. I'm still gravitating more to Tampa Bay stacks and AM Goff stacks because of Gibbs, and to some degree Montgomery, and because of the point James made about correlation between Goff outcomes and Detroit points because of all these positional sort of versatilities they get points out of. And yeah, I mean, I just think you need to be sort of saying to yourself like, yeah, there's only a few ways to get different. It's like we'll play a different stack, fade a big chalk piece, play a really sneaky player. I think sneaky players are like the most exciting to me because it feels like you're like you know something other people don't, and you're going to get it at lower ownership because of that. It's not like a device that people are aware of that is like an obvious thing to pivot to because it's sneaky. They don't realize it's a good play. So I'm gonna just use that as one more reason to just tell everybody again that I think Justin Jefferson is a fucking amazing sneaky upside play on this slate. Yeah, yeah, I think for large field, yeah, yeah, yeah. Do we know anything about the Giants' defense, specifically their secondary and how they deal with alpha fucking world beater wide receivers like Jetta?
I mean, they're going to still stop him. Like they'll do their best. But to be fair, even last week, against the Jets, who they did very, very well against, like Alan Lazard torched them. First off, and that's an interesting name that we need to talk about for a second. But Garrett Wilson still had like a really, really strong role. Like he had 38% of the targets, 53% of the air yards, 18% of the play action. Like he had a really, really strong role. He probably should have had a much better outcome. But he just ended up getting a little bit shown up by Alan Lazard. I don't think that San Francisco's defense is going to be like an absolute no-go for elite wide receivers. And frankly, for the most part, when it comes to elite wide receivers, those guys are elite because they win in hard matchups. Like I'm not even really worried all that much about using CeeDee Lamb or Justin Jefferson or Garrett Wilson or AJ Brown. Like these guys can win in any matchup. So yeah. Justin Jefferson at lower ownerships last week, he had 29% of the targets, 49% of the air yards, like 43% of the play action targets, which is hilarious. He's gonna end up crushing. Like it's not gonna matter. And I think that Sam Darnold is gonna do fine. Like Sam Darnold is just another flavor of Kirk Cousins. So I like him a lot. I think that we all agree that he's a really interesting option. Really quick before I let Pablo get back to it, the Thoughts and Notes article is posted.
Hey, hold on, James. There's some weird background noise somebody has. I can't.
It's Jason. Mute yourself, you dick. Thank you.
Okay.
Calm the fuck down. My bad. I switched to my phone. Everybody relax. And now I'll go back on mute. No, if anything, he's fucking stealing mine, guy. Come on.
The Thoughts and Notes for week 2 just got posted. Just finished it. So lots of good nuggets in there.
Now tell us about Lazard and why he's terrible, okay, or good chalk. He's not great chalk. I know he's not great chalk. So it's either good, terrible, or okay.
Well, he's only projected to be like 9% owned, first off, which I don't think is massive. But I mean, he had probably the second best role of any wide receiver last week. To put into perspective, here's what AJ Brown had last week. 33% of the target share, 49% of the air yards, 50% of the end zone targets, and 22% of the play action targets. He scored 22.9 fantasy points. Alan Lazard had 31% of the targets, 48% of the air yards, 100% of the end zone targets. Like, he ended up crushing in this role. And scored 27 fantasy points. And like his expected fantasy points, I put it up in the article, but his expected fantasy points even last week were 19.89. Like he's only 3,300. He got no price jump. He's priced like a wide receiver 4. And he's very clearly the wide receiver 2 in that offense, going up against Tennessee defense that I don't necessarily respect. So this is one of those situations where, yeah, it was week one. Anything can happen in a week one sample. I absolutely acknowledge that. But to say that 1 week samples don't matter at all is wrong as well. And if Allen Lazard is going to be a legit wide receiver too for the Jets, and ends up being priced, $6,200 or whatever, $5,800, $6,200. That's $3,000 difference, $4,000 if you think he's going to be like
Yep.
a good wide receiver too. So
Can you play him and Hall? Can you play him and Hall together?
yeah, of course he's 32. He's $3,300. You can play him with fucking anyone you want. He's free. And people are trying to talk themselves into other guys, like Tyler Johnson, DeMarcus Robinson. Those guys are next to Cooper Kupp, who's going to be a massive target hog. And Allen Lazard is next to Garrett Wilson, who is not going to demand the same target share. And both of those guys are going to be way lower owned. So Allen Lazard at 3,300, if he comes in at 9% owned, DeMarcus Robinson is 12, and Tyler Johnson is 15, you can't tell me that those guys all have drastically different outcomes or drastically different distributions. Allen Lazard, I think, is at his ownership, even at 9-10% owned, is still a better play than both of those guys.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it because I think how bad the Jets were last year, combined with their unimpressive primetime game last week, makes people feel like they're just going to be horrific, and it makes them question what every site I believe is projecting to be really, really good value in Lazard. And I think instead of being, chalky, he'll be owned, but not chalky. Nobody thinks he's going to be unowned, but he's not going to be. He arguably should be chalky, and because of those kind of pre-existing Jets narratives, I think it keeps him from being chalky. I think it makes him, we would call it sneaky, but sub chalk, inefficient ownership.
Jason,
You think
does
it's
your
fair,
mic
James?
work on your phone? Can you add to that? It doesn't. I was even being condescending about it. Oh, there he is.
Yeah, I could fucking add to it. Don't you fucking worry.
Dude, we didn't know. We didn't know if it fucking
No,
worked or not.
listen, it's all good. When I win six figures tomorrow, I'm gonna buy up all the Wi-Fi in where I live, and so nobody can have anymore. I'm gonna monopolize the Wi-Fi. Altis can fucking blow me, and that's what's gonna happen. But no, to build on that, James, you said something really important and valuable there that I think people need to really consider when they're building, and it's the competition aspect for the targets. Like every time Cooper Kupp scores or does something, one of those cheap wide receivers does it, right? Like that's just what it is. The only thing I was going to add is that Jalen McMillan is showing, 3% ownership in a very high total game against a team that's going to play a ton of men, and he dropped a touchdown last week. He should have had two of them. So he doesn't have the standing of Lazard. Like if he was Lazard's ownership, he's more of a fade. But I think you bring up a really good point that you can make the micro pivot in those secondary, tertiary options, still maintain upside and gain a lot of leverage that way. I think most people were thinking about how do I leverage off the more obvious chalk. I think that's pretty valuable.
Yep. Hey, James, do sheets need to be updated for, I believe, Jake Ferguson out? Because this Schoonmaker fella, tight end on Dallas, is 2,900, and I think it's missing his role this week. I could be wrong.
I mean, I'll probably end up updating. I don't think he's gonna have a massive role. I don't remember if I adjusted for him earlier. I did. I remember.
Okay.
Let's see. Let's go take a look at Dallas here really quick.
I feel like I'm seeing it. Maybe I'm going to refresh. I feel like I'm seeing this guy Schoonmaker, because Ferguson of it being out. I'm seeing him as like fairly owned
You still have
value.
Ferguson in the sheets, showing like a basically zero projection. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but he's showing ownership too.
No, I mean I have that same thing with Chris McCaffrey for some reason. It's a bug. But both those guys are considered out.
Okay.
I
He may just not have much of a role. I mean, I'm just think it's interesting when people are thinking Parkinson 3,100, Akins 3,000. If you want to go vomit bag, Jason Bill, Theo Johnson 2,600. And I don't know if you're gonna go all the way down there, like. And if it's a DAC team, do you just use this fucking free tight end with CeeDee Lamb if you're gonna double with DAC?
It's the same role as your catcher. You just treat him with your stack. It's the same thing with cheap tight ends. If you play quarterback, you just play the cheap shitty tight end with them and hope they catch a touchdown. That's how tight ends work in DFS these days. Tight ends are just outside of like this.
It's either like the 3 or 4 pay up stars or just fucking play the free guy with your quarterback.
James, I gotta say, you have this Theo Johnson guy projected like a fucking porn star. I'm just saying.
I do have him projected pretty well. That's true.
Ran a lot of routes. He was on the field.
I saw him in the write-up.
He ran a lot of routes. He ran a lot. It'd be a real shame if you stacked him with Daniel Jones. It'd be a real shame. I'm just saying.
It would be.
So let me ask you guys.
It be a real shame to stack him with Daniel Jones. Like you're joking. I'm not. That would be tragic.
No, I'm like 50% there. I can't double stack Daniel Jones. Come on, man. What am I? You know, looks like some men just want to watch the world burn. That's not me. I'm trying to make the world a better place. I can't do that.
Yes, disgusting.
By the way, Pablo, before you get to your next point, I had something to bring up about one of the tight ends. I wanted to say it when we were talking about like the Ram stacks earlier and some of these other guys going based upon the pivot. I don't know if you guys have seen, but there is like a slew of tight ends you could play instead of Kobe Parkinson. Like a slew of them.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of alluding to that. with the Schoonmaker, Akins, even Gesicki, if you want to have somebody opposite like Rice or Pacheco there. So I agree. I think there's like I'm not touching Parkinson outside of a Stafford stack. Like I'm not doing that. Like a chalk, no thanks. Like just pivot to one of those other tight ends. Pair them with their quarterback or at least mini somebody against them. I'm gonna play Parkinson, just fucking do it in a Stafford stack. Like there's no other reason to do that.
Yeah, I'm gonna have 90% Theo Johnson for the culture because I'm trying to prove a point.
90% in your 5 fucking lineups that you have for the Giants.
No. 90% of my 75 in the $5. I put my balls on the table. They make it slap.
You're a worse player than I thought you were.
Yeah, I know. No, trust me. He's honestly right now. I have him in like 4%, if that, and he's not even in any Daniel Jones stacks. Daniel Jones, I strictly have neighbors. That's it, and maybe one Wanda.
Hey, how do you guys feel about the about who you're choosing on the Saints if you're playing a DAC stack between the Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed?
We have Shaheed projected like a.
Is it just?
I don't
do
know.
you think it's just a price thing? Is it a price decision? Because Kamara's 7K, Olave 64, Shaheed's 46. The benefit that Olave and Shaheed have is that you can play them in the flex, and then you can use either one of those cheaper running backs or go double expensive running back. So, on the flip side, you can use Kamara, and then like Kamara, I don't think is going to be. I think he's going to be pretty squeezed. I don't think he's going to be very owned. I think he's just going to be squeezed. I mean, Breece Hall, more expensive. Pacheco, 100 less than him. Kyron Williams, 200 less than him. People are kind of starting to talk up Derrick Henry now. Like I keep hearing him every other tweet and podcast I listen to. So I kind of feel like he's going to be a little more owned than expected. Gibbs, everyone wants. Connor's a little off the radar in that game, I feel like. People just don't really want to play him. And a week after being heavy chalk, no one's going to play Rachaad White. So anyway, my point here is I think Alvin Kamara is going to be pretty low owned. And going back to my original question, between the positional flexibility you get by playing Olave or Shaheed versus I think a real chance Kamara is going to be pretty low owned. How do you guys feel about who you're bringing back opposite of Dak Stack?
Probably Shaheed for me. We look at his projection too. He's like projected tiny bit less than Olave, and you're getting 1,800 in savings. I also really just like I like the idea of the matchup. Like when these teams that run a bunch of man-to-man play against a bunch of man-to-man all the time in practice, he's just a man burner. I really like that with him, and I like with Shaheed. You don't need a lot for him to really get there. I get what you're saying about Kamara. I don't know how much I want to really prioritize him. This is more of I just don't trust his coaching staff. Like we've been banging the drum for years. Like why don't we give him more? Like more and more and more. I think Dennis Allen's like an absolute buffoon. He did have a good opportunity last week, so I get it. I'm leaning more towards what you originally said with Shaheed for that positional flexibility, and Rashid Shaheed in general is just like a really good value filler for a lot of these lineups. He's tough to get past in that range, honestly.
Yeah, I don't disagree. In the price range, it is a little bit of like no man's land value wise. You've got Lazard that we already talked about being untrusted, and that's why he's not as owned as he should be at his value, at his usage. Tyler Johnson, who, I think is getting steamed now a little bit, and we all like it, to some degree if you're going to play Stafford. Demarcus Robinson. It looks like the Bengals cheap guy again. I'm going to try to say his real name because I kind of agree with James. I feel like his nickname is dumb. Or Iodine, as you call him, Jason. Iosivas.
I can't take credit for the Iodine. I read that in our chat because somebody else can't pronounce his name, so I don't want to take credit for that. I'm just saying I'm not like James who says Darnold when it's Darnold. That is not me. I don't do that.
I was gonna leave that one alone, my man. Anyway, I think that Shaheed price wise is just between those cheapies and then like getting up to Godwin. People want neighbors. Him and JMO in there kind of in that like not punt but not quite mid range. Him and JMO kind of stick out to me. And I don't know. I mean, I get Ladd McConkey's role, but I'm not excited to play a lot of that game. I get Brian Thomas. I played him last week with Trevor, and Thomas was like the only part of my lineup that got there really. So I think he's good, just not a priority this week. So I agree. I think Shaheed and JMO kind of stick out in that range and make for interesting builds. If you're, I don't know that I would seek Shaheed out, but I think if you're playing a Dak stack, it's a really nice bring back. I'll say that.
Shaheed, I think he's good.
Yeah.
I don't have any problems with playing him. I thought that the Saints offense would be good this year. Y'all know me. I think that Derek Carr is a totally serviceable quarterback. I don't have any problems with him. I think that Olave is probably the one that I would prefer because nobody's gonna fucking play him. Like nobody is gonna play him, and he can legit like break a slate. Week 1, I don't think that he was that valuable. Let's go take a look at what his usage was. I don't think he was all that great. But we know that he has like 10, 11, 12 target upside. And if that's going to be the upside that you're allowed to get for 2% ownership and a bring back, then I think that's where you would kind of have to go. But I did write up Rashid Shaheed a couple different places. Like his target share was 22%. He had like 60% of the air yards or something, or 47%, something really, really high. But his expected fantasy points were low. His touchdown was kind of fluky, but his touchdowns are kind of always going to be fluky. So he's fine. I don't mind either one of them. I think that I'm much less inclined to stack Dallas. I'm not in love with stacking Dallas one way or another.
I think it's
but
a very small field play. I think they have median. I don't think they have that much ceiling. And I think in a field where you don't need like crazy ceiling to win, you could win with them. Admittedly, though, there are a lot of pivot stacks with a lot of ceiling, so it's a risky play, but I just think it works better in a field where you don't need that many points to win.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'm not sure. So you say that in super small field it makes more sense, but in super small field the best thing that you can play is Matthew Stafford stacks. Without even I wouldn't even think twice about that. So I would look at it more as like, okay, it's gonna have no ownership, so there's a lot of volatility, so I would be much more inclined to play in a large field. And in large field I just don't see the ceiling. So I'd rather just play in large field. I'd rather play a singular game stack secondary of CeeDee Lamb and Chris Olave, who can both take over the game, and not play Dak Prescott. That's the way I look at it.
I think that's fair. It's a weird thing. Yeah, I don't think it's in your. I don't think you're playing if you're playing 3 lineups. I think if you're playing 5 to 10, you're playing 1 or 2, maybe just 1.
Yeah, that's fair. I'll buy that.
What else?
I did just rerun NFL, by the way. Looks like everything ran through. This was trying to remove some of those weird things that were coming up with, like Christian McCaffrey was still showing up and some of that other stuff. So this should probably have an effect on ownership, and I don't think it'll have too big of an effect on mediums, but it should have an effect on ownership.
It's a good slate. It does feel like a smallish big slate. Like the sneaky Jefferson thing makes it a bigger slate. The variety of ways you can. I mean, you can play Tampa Bay Detroit a number of ways. You can play Stafford stacks that are going to be unowned. Like I said, I think you can play some Dak stacks because I don't think it's like a 1 out of 3. If you're playing 3 lineups, but if you're playing 5 to 10, you probably have 1 or 2. And then I think the decision around running back with like double cheap versus Hall Mason is you have some sort of options in terms of lineup builds because of that decision that leads to. So I think there's options. I don't know that there's like any sneaky games that I would want to like focus on stacking that I don't think people are on. Like, I guess I do ask myself if I should hedge with a Mahomes team because it's like the only higher total game that will be somewhat owned, where like I have very little outside of like Rice and Pacheco, like one-offs. And I think, you just have to ask yourself like, if you're playing 5 to 10 lineups, like should you have a Mahomes team just because it's going to be owned, and of the games that could go off, like it is one of those, or of the teams that could go off. I don't think since he can do shit. So I guess I'm just saying I don't think it's like unreasonable to have a Mahomes team if you're playing a bunch of lineups. But I still put it as less of a priority than the pivots that we've been talking about with Stafford or Mayfield, which to me are more exciting, like stack pivots in GPPs.
Well, I just think it comes down to, I wrote in the thoughts and notes, I think there's like 6 teams that you can realistically stack on the slate. It's a pretty small slate in regards to the teams that are actually valuable. You have Kansas City, you have the Rams, you have Detroit, you have San Francisco, you have Arizona, Baltimore, and Tampa Bay. It's like 7 teams, right?
Yeah.
And you don't really have to think too much harder past those teams. You really don't. Because the way that you are building your lineups is going to be like the winners of this slate are going to be people who are smart about the way they combine the popular plays, because all the popular plays look fine. It's hard to poke holes in basically anything. Like Cooper Kupp looks like great play. Brees Hall, Jordan Mason look like great plays. Patrick Mahomes, totally fine play. Good team total. Everything like that. There are not very many low-owned ringers that you can look at outside of the Al Mazards or some of the running back spots, right? But the way that you go about it is you're deciding your stacks mostly off of which stacks allow me to leverage what the field is already doing and pass them at the same time. That's going to be teams like the Rams. It's going to be teams like Detroit. It's going to be teams like San Francisco. Like these teams where not only does it project well from a median standpoint, but you also gain that extra boost of leverage to help you pass the field while they're all doing the things that they're normally doing. Speaking of, if people are playing Jaden Daniels naked, like one way to leverage the field is to pair him with Terry McLaurin. It went awful last week, but that's one of those things where if 15% of the field is going to play a quarterback without a wide receiver, in order to win a GPP, he's probably going to throw a touchdown. Pair him with McLaurin, pair him with Ertz, pair him with, one of these other wide receivers who sucks, right? Like, it's going to happen. So looking at these people who want to play a quarterback without a wide receiver, pair them with wide receiver, and that's another way to leverage what the field is already doing and pass them while doing it. So I think that's mostly what this slate comes down to, is looking at the field, saying, here's what the field is doing. Go ahead and just follow them with it, lower the volatility on your lineups, but also figure out a way to pass them when it goes right. And that's how you win slates like this.
Yeah. Yep. What's good is that I feel like there's a lot of clarity in like the chess pieces on this one, like it feels, it's kind of nice in that regard. And I don't know if that's just because it's early and it's kind of obvious to me where ownership is going to be going, or it's just one of those slates. It just feels like a very easy slate to sort of break down into, okay, these are the chalk pieces. These are the sneaky pieces. Here's the pivots. Here are the game stacks. Here's the alternative game stacks. It feels like everything's very easy to categorize. And to me, that's fun totally because it's fun because like if you see it that way, you can build a bunch of fucking lineups that in a variety of ways have the ability to pass the field, right? Like once you've identified the pieces, this is the one area I feel like we do a lot more of, just like as a chat and just like you, James, and the way you teach, than like the majority of other sites that I've ever seen, is that we're more focused on the game theory, and that's because that is where it's won and lost for football. It's like that is. Everything is you can figure out like what you could like literally categorize every piece of a slate. Like this is the chalk stack, this is the pivot, this is the sneaky upside expensive piece, this is the sneaky upside value play. Here's a contrarian direct leverage off that stack. Like everything you can categorize. And the way you win is by taking advantage of all those pieces and combining them for the right amount of leverage. It's not in getting better projections. It's not in finding like that many sneaky pieces. Like they're fun to find. I love using them because you feel like you've got a trick up your sleeve. But I really think for football, it kind of more boils down to just like playing the right amount of leverage. And it's not about the projections. Like it's about the way you use ownership with projections to make decisions to win. I know I'm saying the same thing in a variety of ways, but like to me that's maybe not that obvious to a lot of people who play DFS, and for whatever reason I feel like it's really not obvious to people who play NFL DFS. Everybody thinks like you have to find like the weirdest fucking off the wall stack you've ever could think of. And you're like, dude, like That's not in play. Like that's not on the slate. Pretend that doesn't exist. That's not how you win.
Damn straight. Preach it. Jason, you got any closing thoughts here?
The only closing thoughts I was really going to say is that I had were I think the double pay down of running back strategy, just from the builds I've been doing here on the side, it makes a lot of sense. I think you could do it in small field. I think you could do it in large field. It does make a lot of sense. And the last real thing that I wanted to, I guess, highlight with everybody too, is that you're going to see a lot of people this week. And I'm surprised his ownership is that low, because I feel like I'm seeing this guy talked up everywhere this week. If people I think they're going to, get cute with Justin Fields today, tomorrow, I think you're going to maybe see some more people on him as we get closer to lock. I've been seeing that guy talked about everywhere. So just be very wary. And yeah, if you're going to play Jaden Daniels, fucking stack somebody with him, please, for the love of God. Please do it. That's all my thoughts. Oh, Danny Jones.
Well done. Well done. Well done.
Well, this has been great. I'm going to stop the recording now. I don't know that means we need to stop talking. We'll find out. I've never used this before, but I'm going to click the button. And
People may have questions. People may have questions.
Well, oh, yeah. People might have questions. Do people have questions, I guess, before I stop recording?
Yeah.
Anybody here have questions?
Yeah, please fire away.
Calling once. Calling twice. I think a lot of people left. That's okay. Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, we'll obviously take questions in chat as well, but I'm going to stop the recording. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.